Uh, all right. I believe I am recording. All right. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I know we are all struggling on online classes due to coronavirus. So for my presentation, I am doing it on the American Dust Bowl. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not used to this. Anyways, my project is on the American Dust Bowl. It is well, I'd say it's more of a farming related incident that influences the weather rather than a weather related incident that influences farming. But the American Dust Bowl really is one of the most important topics to talk about when you're talking about human influences on weather through agricultural means. I'd actually say it's one of the most, I'd say it's the most important. You also have like chlorofluorocarbons if your microwaves and your refrigerators, but this one was caused by ignorance and a lack of study, which is why I chose to do it. I thought it was really interesting. Now, let me pray I get this right. And I did not get it right. I am, oh yeah, space bar, my bad. So let's begin. What is the Dust Bowl? The Dust Bowl was a period of times from the early 30s in the Americas where life wasn't greener on the other side of the fence. It was gray, dusty, and cloudy. There were many conditions that influenced the form of these dust clouds. The main one would be improper farming. It was terrible. It was primarily localized in the Great Plains region, which is something people don't really like to drive out to unless you like going to Oklahoma or Idaho. But if you do, nothing against you. Idaho is famous for the potatoes. That's pretty cool. Um, there was also the Great Depression. Yeah. There was a Great Depression. There was new farmers, a lot of stuff. The tragedies didn't really get noticed until the Dust Bowl started reaching out of the Great Plains region and ended up in areas such as Washington, D.C. and even New York. I'm pretty sure if you look at New York right now, you'll see it's still just as smoggy and cloudy, but this is from their own making. It's not from the Dust Bowl. All right. So yes, Dust Bowl is a storm of dust, mainly soil, topsoil to be specific, that's been picked up due to winds from the Great Plains. All right, now let's talk about how farming didn't really do their job. You can't really blame them though, it's the 1900s. So after the Civil War, farming in the Great Plains changed from livestock to like cows and pigs to a more agricultural based farming like wheat, rye, soy. I don't think the soy had, but corn. They started farming water dependent crops. But this was fine for the early part. The more experienced you were, the easier it was to handle. This was perfectly fine. However, the main issues started coming when there was a drought. Now, if we all know droughts, we all know it's not really a good thing. Having a drought means there's no water. If there's no water, there's no plants. You could still have crops, but the crops wouldn't be as well grown as they would have been if there wasn't a drought. And that was a core belief that if you tilt the soil, rain would eventually come. And they really overestimated when it would rain. So let us continue on this point. The Homestead Act, which is my third bullet point right here, basically gave people a lot of land. It was used as an incentive to get people who wanted to farm but didn't have the land or the resources to go to the Midwest, not Midwest, the middle Great Plains area. And this led to a bunch of people who honestly had no business farming. Like these people were better off as an apprenticeship, but I think this is the one where the government unintentionally caused a problem because when these inexperienced farmers started farming, they raised their topsoil. And this is an agricultural thing. It's not really weather based, but topsoil is very important because it's meant to keep the plants in place. It stops them from moving. It's also water rich nutrients, which doesn't help now that there was a drought, but it was still like getting rid of it made things only worse. So you had a bunch of these newcomers just getting rid of their topsoil because they thought their yield would have been bigger if they did. And it did get bigger. In all fairness to them, it got bigger for the first year, but they ruined the topsoil so they can have the consistent outkeep that they would have gotten if there was still topsoil. And then there was also a severe depression. The Great Depression actually happened during this time zone, which led to farmers only deciding to farm more of their land because they needed to keep up crop outputs in order to make profits. And when some of these things didn't sell because no one had money to buy wheat, barley, or rye, it just led to all those crops withering up and the soil came loose with it. All right, so let's talk about some of the notable dust storms and their nicknames and stuff. So the time period where dust storms were prominent were known as the early 30s. Not the early 30s, the dirty 30s, my bad. The dirty 30s, because wherever you went, there was dust. It was terrible. They also had the names of black blizzards. And the most notable event I could talk about would be Black Sunday, which happened April 14th, 1935. This was the worst storm. It originated from Oklahoma. It went all the way to Boise, Idaho, which from Oklahoma to Idaho. And then it also went to Texas. You know how far you got to go from Oklahoma to Texas? I can't describe how big this storm was. It was 1,000 miles long. It went 100 miles per hour. That's faster than most school zones. Even Cal Poly would have gotten them for that. So it was made up of a lot of dust, 300,000 tons of dust to be in fact. That's equivalent to 42,858 elephants. Yeah, so that was like a stampede of dust right there. It was so bad that it got put on newspapers, and that's when Congress actually started taking most of their action, because they realized you can't really have all these agricultural problems while being reliant on food. Let's see other notable events. Okay, so I don't know if this is weather related or not, so I'm still gonna put it because it's funny. There was an invasion of grasshoppers and rabbits, and not like the pretty rabbits, like the jackrabbits, like they got the long ears, devilish eyes. And then there was the grasshoppers. This was like the Bible 2.0. There was no way to describe how terrible these time periods were for people living in the Great Plains. The rabbit problem got so bad, ate more of their crops, which caused more dust storms. It was terrible. All right, so now that we talked about how this was done, let's talk about the solutions. So Franklin D. Roosevelt was a really cool dude where he decided that farming actually was important despite what many people thought. And so he implemented a bunch of new laws towards farming. And he also instituted a directory specified in making sure we don't have dust bowls happen again. So what happened was that the dust bowls actually ended up benefiting farming in the long run because we got a ton of innovation that we wouldn't have had otherwise. As you can see in the top left corner right here, we have a windbreak. So the principles behind a windbreak is that you can use the trees to have the wind go over the crop. So that way you don't have to deal with your crops being picked up and dragged along. Even if they wither, stuff like rye, barley, and wheat would still only stay there at the end. This was efficient. It was clean. It was very good for preventing disasters, I would say. The next one would be crop rotation. That's self-explanatory. Basically, you can't keep your crops growing in the same area for more than one crop cycle. You switch them to a different sector. And so what crop rotation would do is it would replenish nutrients. Like you'd have tomatoes here, you'd have parsley. I don't think parsley grows on, maybe it does. And you'd have potatoes, and then you'd have wheat, and then you'd switch them. So that way the soil rich from the tomatoes would keep the soil rich would be absorbed by it'd be absorbed by the wheat. And so that caused soil to get stronger and avoid being picked up. There was also no-till farming, which I was talking about before. Topsoil was very important to the Great Plains because the moment it was gone and got loosened up, it would get picked up by the heavy winds, which also led to the Dust Bowl. So no-till farming was basically brought in order to stop the ground from coming back up. It caused a bit of a shortage in crops. However, it was good in the long run. There was also another method called crop cover, where you'd have one crop be stacked in front of another crop. So that way it would take the blunt of the wind trauma, and this would allow the crops to grow. All right, I believe I am finished with the presentation, but I would still like to talk about some of these issues. The most prevalent one would be, how does this have to do with weather? And the thing is, none of this would have happened if people never tried to farm in the Great Plains area. So the strong winds were already there. We all knew the strong winds were going to happen, but the inexperienced farmers led to the topsoil coming up, which led to the winds carrying the ground with it. So the dust storms already happened in a sense, but they were not too big enough to get noticed. The improper farming is what really made the dust storms grow big. Anyways, that should be my project. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope this recorded. I'm a bit dumb, so I think, anyways, yes. Thank you all, everyone. See you later.